Oh, hello. My name is Olivier and I usually go by Tonton 1964, easier to pronounce for non-French speakers. I'd like to talk about accents and pronouncing English. Uh, why should I voice an opinion as I'm not even a native English speaker? Well, I've studied and worked in English-speaking countries and heard a lot of people who were convinced that, one, they had no accent, and two, they knew how things should be pronounced. Not having an accent, what would that be? Speaking Shakespeare's tongue with the original intonations, perhaps? But there aren't many direct witnesses, and they didn't leave many sound records. Or you could go for the legitimacy of English from the UK, but there are so many different accents in the UK. You could decide that the reference accent would be Oxford or Cambridge. Okay, so what's left? We could go with the numbers. The Indians, I think, 1,350,000,000 native English speakers. Excuse me if the numbers are wrong, but it changes every day. Okay, so forget about not having an accent. And somebody else told me once that accents are cute. Accent tells stories about you, about what you've done, who you've met, who you've spoken with. I believe that you should not try to hide your accent, but you can try to change the parts that you don't like and add things to it. Add the parts of other people's accents. If you live in a place where people speak in a certain way, you will pick up the way they speak too. And anyway, some things have several pronunciations depending on where you are and who you're talking to. And I don't care much for people arguing about the pronunciation of vitamins or vitamins, tomatoes or tomatoes, lever, respite, wrath, wrath. Well, I'll go through 4 of my favorite YouTubers who have a very different or specific accent, each of them, and I try to integrate into my own use of English. Each of them has a very precise diction and has put some effort into being understandable. So, first, Avak, the Welsh dragon. That man is probably the kindest streamer I've ever listened to, and I envy his mastery of English. He reminds us often that English is not his first language, but he still speaks it better than a lot of natives. He never swears or uses vulgarity, but has a very sharp tongue when it comes to sarcasm. Well, I learned English from my mother and her parents, so there was never any swearing in English for me. So I know the words, but they're not my first recourse. That's why I'm particularly sensitive to Avak's use of terms like scallywags or worse, scoundrels. I love his accent, very British in general, but with some accentuation, some lilting syllables like he says episodes. I mean, there's an accent added to that first syllable that is musical. Let's say that Welsh to me is more music than words because I don't understand the language, but it is musical. Well, that's a very personal opinion, but I'll stand by it. Second case, I'm going to talk about Nilaus. Danish, master of Factorio, specialist of supply chain management and supply chain management. He's done now full-time content creator. Why would I include another non-native English speaker? Because he has built his English through years of communication with colleagues, clients, providers, I don't know, in a professional environment. You should spend at least a few hours listening to him and you'll find traces of British pronunciation, some American for sure, and something else, not German, not Swedish. Well, when you've eliminated everything else, you will say it's got to be Danish, but it's an international way of speaking. I think he would qualify for me as having the accent that tells the longest story. A story with a lot of work to make it sound so good. Maintaining a consistent commentary in a foreign language while playing a complex game like Factorio that requires levels of skill few people can boast having. Okay, the third YouTuber is Rhapsody. Now that's a very special case for me because he streams from the other side of the planet. But you don't have to turn the video upside down. YouTube does it for you. His accent also tells a story. Well, let's say when I was a kid, I was lucky to study in Melbourne for a year, some 42 years ago, and I was happy to pick up traces of Aussie accent that have disappeared since then, or maybe some traces remain. I don't know. But I can tell that it can be really difficult to follow when you speak full down under English. I mean, when I got there, I'd been to England many times, and suddenly I got into an environment where I could recognize some words in the sentences, but it went all too fast, and most of the words were not the same, or something was wrong. I couldn't understand anything. And if I can tell you, Rhapsody was born in it and must have put a lot of effort into making his speech patterns evolve into something more international. He explains about that. He does a lot of voice acting in his videos, and you'll see he can pick up a lot of different accents, and his default basic English is beautiful. The traces of Australian are still there, but as, once again, melody, something that gives it a musical tone, and it doesn't hurt comprehension at all. Anyway, he's a great human being. You should check him out. I'll add a link at the bottom for all these YouTubers. Now, the last example, I'm going to talk about Big Joe Bear. He's a man with a voice, a man with an incredible sense of humor. I found him while I was looking for streaming of Darkest Dungeon. Like the three former YouTubers, he's an extremely modest person, modest about his knowledge of English, and as such he'll never hesitate to stop the stream, go and check for the pronunciation of a word, and he accepts the fact there are sometimes several acceptable answers, and I feel elevated from listening to his streams. So the guy lives in Florida, but he came from a northern state, I believe, so his accent is also a mixture of several influences, and obviously he's interested in languages, even if he says that he doesn't speak any language and he doesn't master English itself. Well, I'm not knowledgeable enough to recognize the accents from the different states. I could barely differentiate between the southern drawl and the eastern, the different accents. But I really like the version of English as presented by Big Joe Bear. But in truth, it might be his voice that makes him so enjoyable to listen to. Like the voice of Wayne June is the Darkest Dungeon, or even the voice of Twitch, if Twitch has one. Anyway, you've had all my favorite YouTubers, and they all have trouble pronouncing the name of their followers. Well, nobody ever gets Olivier right, even if I say, like Laurence Olivier, they all come up with Oliver Olivia, something like that. Anyway, all this reminds me of the Monty Python sketch, where the guy says, well, it's written Sir Luxury Yacht, but it's pronounced Throat Wobbler Mangrove. Anyway, to wrap up this short video, I just voiced my opinion that in an international environment, you should probably never consider yourself as having the one and only right pronunciation for a word unless you can back it up with a consensus that goes beyond your small portion of the planet, or unless you have a Hindu accent. But then you probably wouldn't. Well, thanks for listening. Love you all. Goodbye.